The last light of the day bled across the horizon, a dying fire smothered by the endless plain. He stood in the doorway of the homestead, shoulders square but heavy with something she could not name. The world beyond their fence line stretched wide and cruel, and somewhere in that vastness, a war waited for him. The air was dry, holding the ghost of storm that had never broken. Dust clung to his boots as though the land itself wanted to keep him from leaving. He carried his coat folded over one arm, his rifle slung against the other, but he had not yet moved. He lingered there, framed by the crooked wood of the door, and her breath caught in her throat at the sight. She had memorized him 100 times before, but now every detail seemed sharper. The crease of his brow, the shadow of stubble, the way his hands flexed when he didn't know what else to do. Neither spoke at first. The silence pressed between them, thick with everything they couldn't say. The prairie wind hummed against the shutters, a low morning song. She reached for the edge of her apron, twisting the fabric until it bit into her palm. He shifted his weight, boots creaking against the boards. "I'll come back," he said finally, the words rough, pulled from someplace deeper than his chest. His eyes didn't leave hers. They were steady, though she knew what it cost him to sound certain. "I swear it." The promise hung there, fragile but fierce, like a candle flame in open air. She shook her head before she could stop herself. The world was not kind to promises. Too many had blown away like dust in this land. Don't say it if you don't mean it. His jaw worked, a muscle ticking as he fought for words. He stepped toward her, closing the gap, the scent of smoke and leather rising from his coat. He set the coat down, free hand brushing against hers. "I mean it. I'll come back to you. We'll build the life we talked about. A roof strong enough to keep the storms out. A table long enough for family." He swallowed hard. "I'll marry you when I return." Her eyes stung, though no tears fell. She wanted to believe him with all that she was. But the land had taught her caution. The land had shown her how quickly life could be taken away. "Men don't come back from war," she whispered. "Naho." "Then I'll come back broken," he answered without hesitation, voice low but sure. "Better broken here with you than whole in the ground somewhere far." The words undid her. She pressed her forehead to his chest, inhaling deeply, branding the moment into memory. His arms folded around her, strong yet trembling, the weight of his decision pressing to the fabric. He kissed the top of her hair, slow, deliberate, as if committing her to himself the same way. The sun dipped further, shadows spilling long across the prairie. Time, always merciless, urged him forward. Outside, his horse pawed at the dirt, impatient, sensing the pull of miles ahead. The saddle gleamed with oil, stirrups shining faintly, a soldier's mount prepared for the long road. He pulled away gently, though the space between them felt like a wound. He reached for the coat again, slipping it over broad shoulders, the fabric settling like armor. She studied every movement, unwilling to let even the smallest detail fade from her mind. "Promise me something," she said, voice breaking. He paused, rifle strapped tight in his grip. "Anything. Don't forget me. Don't let war take that away." His eyes softened, a rare unguarded light. "That's the one thing it can't touch." He pressed something into her hand then, a folded scrap of cloth, worn and faded. It had once been part of his uniform, torn in training, kept ever since. "Keep this, so when you doubt, you'll know I'm still tied to you." She closed her fist around it, clutching until her knuckles ached. The wind picked up, carrying with it the low cry of a night bird. Darkness crept closer, swallowing the edges of the world. He looked out over the prairie, as though memorizing it, then swung into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath him, muscles tense, the road already calling. He turned once more to face her. Against the last light, his silhouette carved itself into her memory. Tall, resolute, framed by the bleeding sky. She lifted a hand without realizing, a farewell she could not voice. "I'll come back," he said again, stronger this time, as though repetition might bind fate. Then he nudged the horse forward. The sound of hooves struck like a heartbeat, steady, certain, fading into distance. Dust rose in his wake, swallowed by the dusk. She stood at the threshold until the last echo disappeared, until silence was all that remained. Only then did she sink onto the step, the scrap of cloth pressed to her lips. The night pressed close around her, and though the world felt hollow, the promise still burned. It was not enough to ease the ache, but it was enough to keep her waiting. The first gunfire did not sound like thunder. It was sharper, crueler, a crack that split the night air and left silence in its wake. He had expected glory when he left home, had imagined banners and trumpet calls, but the war met him with mud, blood, and men hollowed by exhaustion. The campfires burned low across the valley, each flame nothing more than a trembling spark against the dark. He sat alone with his rifle across his knees, staring at the blackened barrel. Around him, soldiers muttered in low voices, some praying, others cursing, most silent. The smell of gunpowder and sweat had become a second skin. His coat clung heavy with grime, his hands cracked from weeks without rest. He thought often of the promise he had made, of the warmth of her forehead against his chest. The memory was what kept him upright when his body begged to collapse. Letters lay folded in the bottom of his pack, words he had written by firelight but never sent. He could not bear the thought of them arriving without him. Each one began the same, "I'll be home soon." Each one ended with the same vow, "Wait for me." The paper carried his heart, though he doubted it would ever reach her. The war itself was a beast with no face, a storm that devoured and demanded. When the order came at dawn, he rose with the others, boots sinking into mud as they marched toward the tree-line. The world was gray with fog, the kind of morning where the sun refused to rise. He gripped his rifle until his knuckles burned, every step dragging him farther from the life he had sworn to return to. The first volley came sudden and vicious. Bullets shredded through the mist, the air alive with whistling death. Men fell hard into mud, cries torn from their throats. He fired back, each shot deafening, smoke stinging his eyes. The ground shook beneath the cannon fire, and he staggered forward, forcing himself into the chaos. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his mind was not here. It was with her, with the homestead, with the candle in the window he prayed was still burning. He found himself face to face with the enemy, a boy no older than himself, uniform tattered, eyes wild. They raised rifles at the same time, but hesitation caught them both. For one suspended heartbeat, he thought of mercy, thought of sparing the boy, but the choice was stolen by another shot. The boy fell backward, chest torn open, blood mingling with the earth. He stood there, staring, bile rising in his throat. The war had no room for mercy. The battle raged on. He crawled through trenches, leapt over the fallen, felt the sting of shrapnel across his cheek. Smoke coiled through the trees, thick and suffocating, but still he pressed forward. Every instinct screamed to run, to survive, but deeper than instinct was a vow he carried. Survival was not for himself alone. It was for her, for the life waiting on the other side. Hours blurred into eternity. He lost count of how many men fell, of how many times he pulled the trigger. By the time the sun bled its way through the fog, the field was a graveyard. The cries of the wounded echoed across the valley, each one a reminder of how fragile the promise truly was. He staggered, legs weak, arms heavy, lungs filled with smoke. Still alive, but how much longer could he hold? Then came the second wave. They struck with fury, and he was caught in the crush. A blast threw him to the ground, his rifle torn from his hands. Pain surged through his side, hot and blinding. He gasped, pressing a hand against his body, feeling the warm spread of blood beneath his coat. The world tilted, sky and earth trading places as he struggled to rise. He thought of her then, clearer than he had since he left. He saw her standing in the doorway, apron clenched in trembling fists, eyes shining though she refused to cry. He heard her voice, soft and breaking. "Don't forget me." He tried to hold on to the sound, to make it louder than the screams and the gunfire. A comrade bent over him, shouting words he could not hear, dragging him toward cover. He tried to rise to fight, but his body betrayed him. The world narrowed to a tunnel of light and shadow, his breath ragged, his heartbeat stuttering. He clutched at the scrap of cloth she had given him, still tucked inside his jacket, stained now with his blood. He wanted to speak, to send one last message into the world. The words caught in his throat, but he forced them out, lips barely moving. "I'll come back." The comrade shook his head, face blurred through the haze. But the soldier no longer looked at him. His eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun broke free of the smoke for just an instant, casting gold across the ruined field. In that fleeting light, he imagined the homestead, the fence line, the wide prairie stretching forever. He imagined her waiting at the door, the candle burning, the promise alive. The pain ebbed as the world dimmed. His grip slackened, hand falling away from the cloth. The roar of war grew distant, replaced by a silence deep and strange, as though the land itself held its breath. His chest rose once more, then stilled. And yet, the promise did not die with him. It lingered in the air, woven into the smoke, carried across the plain toward the one who still waited. The letter arrived on a day when the sky carried no color. The wind dragged dust across the yard, lifting it into little storms that died as quickly as they were born. She opened the door before the rider even reached the gate, something inside her already knowing what he carried. His face held the tightness of a man who had repeated this duty too many times. He removed his hat, said her name once, then offered the folded paper. She did not open it while he watched. She waited until the echo of hooves faded, until the silence wrapped the house again. At the table, she unfolded the message with slow hands. The words were formal, cold, written by men who had not seen him fall. With honor, with sacrifice, with bravery. Phrases designed to soften the truth. Yet the truth was clear enough. He was gone. Her fingers pressed into the paper until it tore. No cry left her throat. Instead, she placed the letter on the table, set the lamp beside it, and sat there through the night. The candle burned down. The shadows grew long, and still she did not move. The promise echoed in her ears like a voice just spoken. "I'll come back." In the days that followed, neighbors came with casseroles and clumsy words. Some told her to let him rest, to carry on, to think of her own life. Others whispered that no man kept his promises in war. She thanked them quietly, accepted their food, then closed the door and locked it against their pity. Alone, she clutched the scrap of cloth he had left her, the one stained now with the faint trace of his blood, and held it as if it were a heartbeat. Seasons turned. Winter pressed hard against the windows, ice creeping across the glass. She lit a candle each night, setting it on the sill where its glow could be seen from a road. In spring, the river swelled and sang against its banks, and she walked the fields where he once worked, her footsteps sinking into the soil. Summer stretched hot and relentless. Crickets sawing the air, and she sat in the rocking chair on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon where he had disappeared. Autumn came with dying leaves, their fall as silent as her grief. Years began to weave themselves into one another, each marked by the same vigil. She kept the house as if he might step through the door at any moment. His chair remained at the table, dusted and waiting. His coat stayed on its peg by the door, though the smell of leather had long faded. She could not bring herself to put them away. To do so would be to admit the promise had died with him. Yet the land did not allow her to remain still. Crops demanded tending. Fences required mending. Alone, she worked with hands blistered and backbent. In time, others came, drifters, orphans, the wounded with nowhere to go. They asked for food, for shelter, for nothing more than a night's rest. She gave what she could, and when some chose to stay, she did not send them away. An old man with a limp helped patch the roof before winter. A child who had lost both parents learned to fetch water and feed the chickens. A woman scarred from a fire kneaded bread with quiet patience. Piece by piece, they filled the silence, not as replacements, but as echoes of the life he had wanted for her. A long table, a family forged not by blood but by need and care. Still, she dreamed of him. Some nights she woke with the sound of his voice in her ears, certain he had just spoken her name. Other nights she felt the weight of his hand brush her shoulder, the warmth of his breath against her hair. She would reach for him, only to find a bed cold and empty. Morning always came cruel, but she endured. The promise lived in her more fiercely than memory. It guided her choices, kept her strong when the weight of loneliness threatened to crush her. She told the boy by the harsh stories of a soldier who rode away but vowed to return. She taught the scarred woman how to listen for the prairie winds, how to hear in their moan a song of endurance. She reminded herself each night, as she lit the candle, that keeping the flame alive was keeping him alive in some way too. Years gathered like shadows. Her hair silvered, her hands hardened. The horizon never changed, always wide, always endless. Some evenings, when the sky bled red at sunset, she would swear she saw a rider in the distance, tall in the saddle, coat whipping against the wind. Her heart would leap, her breath catch, but the figure always dissolved into dust and light. She told no one of these visions, fearing they might call them madness. Yet she knew better. They were not madness. They were memory answering her devotion. One stormy night, thunder cracked so close the walls shook. The little family huddled in the dark, wind howling, rain pounding the roof like fists. She stood by the window, candle lit, watching the horizon swallowed by lightning. For a moment, she thought she saw him again, clearer than before, walking the ridge, face turned toward the house. She pressed her hand to glass, breath fogging against it, heart racing with the fierce certainty that the promise had not been broken. When the storm passed, nothing remained on the ridge, yet the certainty lingered, settling into her bones. It was not his body she was waiting for anymore. It was his vow, living through her, through the family gathered at her table, through the land itself that refused to forget. She returned to the chair on the porch, candle burning beside her. The prairie stretched into darkness, quiet now, but alive with a memory of footsteps, of hoofbeats, of a voice whispering still. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the promise steady in her chest, no longer fragile but eternal. The years had taken him, but they had not taken what bound them, and as long as the candle burned, she would not let them. Night was restless, the air thick with the weight of an approaching storm. The prairie grass bowed low beneath the wind, whispering in long, mournful tones. Inside the homestead, the fire burned low, casting its glow across weary faces gathered around the table. The old man with the limp polished a lantern with steady, deliberate hands. The scarred woman kneaded dough by instinct, though no one was hungry. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling wood with more force than skill, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to knock. She sat in her rocking chair, candle flickering beside her, the flame bending with every draft. Her hands rested in her lap, folded around the scrap of cloth she had carried all these years. Her eyes, silvered by age but sharp with memory, were fixed on the horizon. She had felt it building for days, a sense that something was shifting, that the promise which had carried her so far was about to be tested once more. The sound came just before dawn. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then louder, rushing across the plain with urgency. The boy leapt to his feet, knife clattering to the floor. The old man froze, lantern light trembling across his face. The scarred woman wiped her hands against her apron, gaze narrowing. All eyes turned to the door. She rose slowly, the chair creaking behind her, heart pounding with a rhythm she had not felt in decades. For a heartbeat, she believed it was him, that the years had folded back, that the promise had summoned him home. She clutched the cloth tighter, holding her breath as the hoofbeats drew near. But the door burst open to strangers. Raiders, their faces masked with dust and greed, stormed into the room. Their rifles glinted in the firelight. Their boots thudded against the boards. They demanded food, money, the little scraps of safety this family had built. The boy's eyes widened with terror. The scarred woman stepped in front of him, fists clenched. The old man's limb dragged as he tried to position himself between the raiders and the rest. She stood at the head of the room, unflinching, her back straight though her body trembled with age. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "You'll take nothing here." The leader laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the air. He leveled his rifle toward her. "Old woman, you can't stop us." She did not move. In that instant, she felt him beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice whispering through the roar of the storm outside. "Stand firm. Protect them." This is what the promise was for. Her fear fell away like ash. She drew herself taller, eyes locked on the man before her. The others in the room felt it too, a presence larger than the moment, something in the air that bristled with resolve. The boy darted for the rifle left near the hearth. The scarred woman shoved a raider backward with surprising force. The old man swung the lantern, its glass shattering in a burst of flame and oil. Chaos erupted. Gunfire, shouts, the clash of bodies against walls. The homestead filled with smoke and firelight. Every corner alive with struggle. Through it all, she remained steady, gripping the cloth like a banner. She shouted orders with a strength that silenced doubt. Hold your ground. Protect each other. Her words carried more than command. They carried the weight of the vow that had never died. One raider lunged toward her, rifle raised, but the boy's shot rang out first. The man fell hard, dust rising beneath his body. Another raider swung at the old man, but the scarred woman struck with a rolling pin, her face lit with fury. The remaining intruders, startled by resistance they had not expected, faltered under the force of this unlikely family's unity. At last, the raiders fled into the storm, swallowed by rain and thunder. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the ragged breathing of those who remained. The homestead stood scarred but unbroken. The family gathered together, their faces lit by both exhaustion and triumph. She sank back into her chair, body trembling now that the danger had passed. The cloth slipped open in her hands, revealing the faded stain of blood. She stared at it for a long moment, then lifted her gaze to the others. The boy clung to the scarred woman's side, eyes wide but alive. The old man lowered himself into a chair, chest heaving. They looked to her not just as the one who had given them shelter, but as the center that held them all. She understood then. The promise had never been about his return in flesh. It had been about this moment, about giving her strength to keep going, about building a family where there had once been only loss. He had kept his vow through her, through them, through every act of endurance and every choice not to surrender. The storm outside began to ease, thunder rolling into distance. Rain tapped gently against the windows, washing away the blood and dust. She rose once more, joints aching but spirit unbowed, and carried a candle to the sill. She lit it anew, its glow steady against the dark, not as a signal for a man long gone, but as a beacon for those who had found their way here. The others gathered close, drawn by the light, by her certainty, by the invisible presence that still lingered in the room. She spoke softly, her voice carrying over the hush of rain. He promised he would come back, and he has. Not in the way I dreamed, but in the life we have built, in the family we have become. They nodded, understanding without words. The boy reached for her hand, small fingers curling around her own. The scarred woman rested a hand on her shoulder. The old man bowed his head, eyes closed in reverence. She looked once more toward the horizon. The prairie stretched wide, endless, alive with wind and memory. In the distance, lightning flared one last time, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw him, riding the ridge, tall and resolute, watching over them. She did not weep. Instead, she smiled, the lines of her face deep with both grief and peace. The candle flame wavered, but did not falter. The promise had not died. It never would.